Okay, everybody, welcome to the call. Tonight we are going to be talking about the critical questions that you need to be asking your guidance counselor. It is April and the year is winding down, and it's very important if you are an underclassman to be meeting with your guidance counselor if you haven't already, and it's a good time to engage with the guidance office regardless of what grade you're in, 10th grade, 11th grade especially, so that you can be prepared going forward into, let's say, 12th grade with the various things that you're going to need and the various relationships that you're going to need to have and the tasks that are going to be important both for you and for the guidance office, and so that you and your parents can understand exactly who is going to be doing what as we get into the all-important and critical fall of your 12th grade year. So what we're going to be covering tonight was sent out to you in the monthly action plan. It's the 18 critical questions that you can ask your guidance counselor, that you should be asking your guidance counselor. And so we're going to go through that, Jill and I together. Jill, do you want to give a little bit of a background as to how this thing sort of evolved?
Sure. It evolved out of need, and I know a lot of us on the call tonight understand the constraints of the guidance office, and in many cases you won't even meet your guidance counselor face-to-face or your college counselor face-to-face until your child's already in the fall of 12th grade, and that's just a matter of supply and demand far exceeding the supply of guidance counselors. The challenge with that is there is a section on the college application, the Common App in particular, that asks for a recommendation from the guidance counselor, and the college counselor at your school is also the conduit to other colleges. They contain great critical information and in many cases relationships with various college officers, and so it behooves you to not be a student who doesn't know their counselor, or more importantly, to have the counselor know you. Unfortunately, that's not always reasonable, and it's very difficult for students. So we just like to kind of make the most of the opportunities. April is a good month because it tends to be a slower month with the college guidance offices in your schools as well as the guidance office, and it's a great opportunity to introduce yourself. And if you have an opportunity to sit down and meet with a counselor, and if you're in 11th grade, you absolutely should not leave the school year unless you have. We want to make sure that you know exactly what to ask, because one of the things about this entire process is that it's a three-pillared process. There are responsibilities that are squarely upon the student. There are responsibilities and procedures and policies that the school has in place to manage the process for college. And then the third component is the parent. And everybody needs to understand what the rules are for their particular school. So while we can guide you through the process, each school manages components of the college application process slightly differently. So we want to make sure that you meet with your counselor and that you have something important and critical to ask. And again, your student takes the lead. So this was out of need and recognition, and it started as an email that I was sending along to friends and family who were concerned, and it evolved into a greater curriculum that we've shared with guidance offices throughout the state that we're in, which is Florida.
Okay, so great. That's good intro. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit here, and I'm going to go right into number one, and that is the importance of getting organized and to understand again what is coming up in the fall, specifically what are the key dates and deadlines that are going to be upon you as they relate to completing applications, college fairs, sending recommendations, getting transcripts sent. So there are a lot of things, a lot of different steps that have to happen, and as you can identify these and break them down into smaller steps, the whole process can become a lot easier. But it's very important that you and your guidance office are communicating and understanding what the deadlines are for you to communicate to them which schools you plan to apply to so that they can get transcripts out the door on time. You do not want to be in a situation, and this does happen, and it happens at some of the more prestigious schools in the area, where unfortunately the guidance office lets things slip through their fingers, and you don't want to, again, to use another cliche, you don't want to slip through the cracks where your transcript does not end up going to a specific school, or your teacher recommendation does not end up going to a specific school. Again, ultimately, the burden is on you, the student, and you, the parent, to make sure that this stuff gets done. So, for example, if you have 10 schools you're applying to, the teacher recommendation may go to, to 8 or 9 of them and miss one of them, and that can be a problem if that school is not on the common application, or if it's not part of the other mechanisms that the school uses in order to send transcripts. So there could be some colleges that are sort of off the standard way of sending information. So you just want to make sure that you're communicating with the guidance office and you're making sure that transcripts and recommendations and all the necessary components that they need to be sending are being sent. You also, again, want to know when the college visits are going to be coming, colleges who are visiting your schools, and those sorts of things. So this process, this visit with your guidance counseling team or counselor in the spring of 11th grade or even in 10th grade is to really get organized and to understand what is going to be coming up.
I would say that every school has a master calendar that is usually posted somewhere, and it's very important that you pay attention to that timeline because schools have turnaround times that are different. In other words, if you know that you have a deadline that we're providing to you about a particular application deadline and your school requires 3 weeks notice to send out a transcript, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to the school's timetable because just going and begging in the guidance office is not going to help your case, and we want to make sure that those dates are clearly plugged into whatever master calendar that you're keeping for college, and that should start early on.
I also want to highlight this here, this thing called Naviance, which is a very important tool. It's in a lot of high schools, it's in a lot of private schools, and now it's being implemented in the public schools as well. And what you need to understand about Naviance is how it's being used in your school. If it is integrated with the application, then Naviance is the mechanism by which teacher recommendations will be sent, your transcript will be sent, counselor recommendations will be sent. So it's very important that the schools that you're going to be applying to are going to be listed in Naviance, and you're communicating with your guidance counselor through the Naviance tool. So that's a very important question to be asking your guidance office when you do meet with them is A, do they use Naviance, and B, the extent to which they're using it and making it available, making it a requirement to send information to different colleges. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So obviously getting organized is going to be very important. Number two is, as Jill made reference earlier about the counselor recommendation. So on the application, there is a place for the counselor to write a recommendation or it's what it is. It's a recommendation about the student. The more the counselor knows about the student, the better that recommendation can be in terms of being a personalized verse or prose about the particular student. So I guess the question is how does your counselor want you, the student, to be able to communicate to him or her things about you? How do they want, was it a resume that they want to see? Is it a statement? Is it, regular meetings? Are they going to be taking notes? So how do they want you to communicate to them about your background, your interests, your preferences, what makes you you? You want to add anything to that?
I do. I want to add two things. Often the school also asks the parent to do what's called a brag sheet. In fact, there are some universities that actually ask parents to do something about their student as well. So it is appropriate if your school asks for that you participate. Again, don't miss the deadlines that your school puts. They have them in place because of breaks and other reasons. So make sure that you meet and actually are early on the deadlines and getting things back to your counselor. That actually bodes well for where you're going to be in their queue of importance. And finally, I do want to add that, listen, I want to take some pressure off. For those of you who go to schools where getting access to your counselor is going to be impossible prior to the end of the year or going forward, that section is also, it can be left blank deliberately, and there's no penalty for that. It's only a bonus if they fill it out. In other words, schools recognize that in larger school districts, for example, Dade County, Broward County, the DC area, the greater DC area, where they're very large and the counselor ratios are 1 to 1,000, they recognize that they may not have a personal narrative about every single student, and that will not hurt you. This is just an opportunity for you to learn more about how to get that value add from your counselor that you may not have thought about in the past.
Great, and that is a good point about those ratios. Okay, the next thing is the teacher recommendations. Now you're talking to the counselor about these teacher recommendations and trying to understand, the extent to which the counselor may have input in those recommendations, the extent to which the counselor may oversee or edit or review those teacher recommendations. You want to make sure, you want to know if that's going to be the case. Does the counselor review those teacher recommendations? In some schools, counselors have their eyes on every single teacher recommendation that goes out. In other schools, they do not. So, that's another thing that you want to ask your counselor is to what extent they may have oversight over the teacher recommendation process. And I think it's on the subject of teacher recommendations, I think it's a good idea if you are an 11th grade either parent or student listening in, that by the end of 11th grade you should know who the teachers are who you will be asking to write recommendations. In fact, I would take it a step further. Your teachers should know that they are going to be writing recommendations. You have to make these requests at some point, and we suggest that you do that before the end of the final bell of 11th grade, before you leave, that you talk to those teachers and make that request, and how you go about making that request is a whole other webinar that we could do, but it's a personal process that you want to do, where you do approach the teacher and make that specific request before the end of the school year. So as far as tonight's discussion is concerned, really it relates to the extent to which the guidance office has any insight or involvement in the teacher recommendation process.
Ideally, you do want them to see every recommendation. You don't want that to be a wild card. And again, as Peter pointed out, with our 11th graders, we do have a program just on engagement and how students request teacher recommendations. We do have a process, and you can read about that within your membership site, or you can contact us, or we will be holding a special program for 11th graders on how to do that next month. In addition, I just want to point out, we did have a question, can you ask a teacher who may be leaving the school? And the answer to that is yes, and that's another reason that you want to ask before the school year ends. Ideally, you want to ask an 11th grade teacher. I know that wasn't asked, but I'm going to volunteer it. And ideally, you're going to want core subject matter teachers, unless you have a specialty yourself. So that's English, history, math, science, and two is an ideal number.
To those of us former social studies teachers, I think it's important that we include social studies in that. So
sorry, Peter. I didn't mean to offend.
No problem. But yes, I would say, I think you said if possible, and I would say it's absolutely critical that you ask core teachers. The only difference would be if you're applying to an art school, and an art school or some sort of type of artistic degree is that where you're applying, in which case you can get somebody else. But for most of the colleges out there, the research universities, liberal arts colleges, and so forth, you're going to want to get a core subject teacher from 11th grade. Okay, let's talk about the parent involvement in the meeting with the college council. Sometimes the parents are not involved. Sometimes it's just the students who are meeting with the counselors. But in other times, the parent is involved, and it's important, I think, and in many successful situations, the parent is not only involved in the meeting, but involved in the entire process and communicating with the counselor, making sure that different deadlines are met and so forth. Another thing that's very important in terms of the communication is the issue of early decision, and the issue of whether, what the implications are for early decision, and the commitment on the part of the parents to sign the early decision agreement. Both the parent and the counselor have to sign this agreement. That's just one case, but I do think that in general it is important for parents to be involved and to be communicating with the counselor on a, to have that open line of communication. While saying that, I do believe, and I strongly encourage that parents allow the student to take the initiative. I think that's better for the student and the counselor. I think it's better for the entire operation if the student is the one taking the initiative. The best cases, the best success stories are those where the student is the lead and taking the initiative in this entire process. We as parents, we as counselors are on the outside supporting the student. The student is the one at the center of the circle.
I would also say that this is, again, one of the things that we focus on in our practice, as you all know, is on learning self-advocacy skills, knowing that this process is the first truly independent process, in theory, that our students are going to go through, and it's a great opportunity for them to demonstrate that on their own behalf. Now, I will say, as a tip, especially in the larger school environments, that phone calls are often met with a long delay. I highly recommend email as a choice communication, but I also recommend asking directly how this counselor prefers to be communicated with. And I do agree with Peter in that the student should make the initial contact. I do find, though, that it's more effective if the student also copies the parent on that communication.
Okay. When it comes to building your list, you're definitely going to want to get your counselor's input on the list that you ultimately decide to, the list of schools where you decide to apply. The counselor should have a good idea of, by looking at your GPA, your grades, the course selection that you have through high school, your transcript, as well as your test scores to date. The counselor should be able to give you some recommendations as to schools where they think you may be able to get in, what might be considered reach schools, what might be considered target schools, and what might be considered safety schools. You should be prepared when you walk into that meeting with a list. That's a great way to show for the student to show that she's proactive, that she's taking the initiative, that she's done some research in advance. Bring a list of schools. I would say, around, I don't know what number, 15 to 25, any more, any less. I wouldn't go more than that, but if you have fewer than 15, that's great, because that shows that you've done maybe some narrowing down. But I think it is a good idea to bring a targeted list to the counselor and be open to that. Don't, your point, the point of bringing that list to the counselor is to get feedback, to get open communication. A lot of times what you'll do with that list is, instead of bringing it on paper, even better if your school uses Naviance, is to create that list in Naviance and then ask your counselor to go into your Naviance file to view the colleges that you're thinking about. That's the best way to communicate with the counselor. So it is important that you bring a list to the counselor and that you're open-minded, both with suggestions from the counselor of additional schools, as well as input from the counselor on the schools that you've brought to that meeting.
Now, that said, you are your own best advocate. That's as a child and as a parent. And if you have questions about recommendations you're hearing, or if you're being discouraged or encouraged in a direction that you don't think is appropriate, by all means, speak up, ask questions, let us know. And as a corollary to that, I think this is a great opportunity to ask what the counselor's experience is with those schools, because there may be schools on that list that the counselor's not familiar with, and that's okay. You just want to understand that up front, right from the get-go. And then the following question to that is what is the experience of other students from our school with that particular cohort or school that you're considering? And the counselor has that information, and many schools track that information in Naviance. Not all, but some do.
Well, yeah, what you'll be able to see in Naviance is the data showing test scores and GPA and the success rate or the acceptance rate for that particular college from that particular high school. Excuse me, I just had to take a sip of water. But what you won't see is the relationship, as Jill just mentioned. You won't see the relationship that the school may have with the college. You won't see the anything that's sort of not written, unwritten messages, or again, really just a lot of times this is a nuanced process, and what you won't know is whether students from years past have been snubbed by a particular college for whatever reason, if there are any politics between the admissions office and the counseling office. Sometimes these things do happen, and if you ask the right questions and if you listen carefully, then you can find out whether your high school has an inroad with a particular college or not, and that's good to know. All right.
That said, I would prefer, yes, all that said, urban legends do develop, and I'm sure that you're hearing rumblings if a particular year, a particular school did particularly in their mind poorly with a particular university at some point. You're going to hear that school doesn't like our particular high school. That's not true. Every year and every student is different. And again, this is a good opportunity to remember that eyes on your own paper in this process. This is a personal process. And along that, some of you will be invited to join group meetings with your counselor. It's okay if that's uncomfortable for you and you don't want to participate. I highly recommend you treat it as an information session and ask more general questions about process and procedure, and then save the personal questions either for us or for your counselor in an offline manner through email or another way. So I don't want you to be shocked by that. Some schools have moved to a group information session type meeting. So, it's okay not to share personal information during that, but it is important to still learn the processes and the procedures of each particular school. This is also where you should be narrowing down your list. 11th graders, you should be at about a dozen schools by the end of this year. 10th graders, we'd like to see, as Peter pointed out, 25. 9th graders, we're looking very broadly 40. And so I don't expect 9th and 10th graders to have an opportunity for most of you to meet directly with your counselors at this point, but this is just something to think about as well as you move through school.
I would add, the only thing I would add is that, and Jill's right, that there are some schools where your meeting with the counselor is not going to be a private one-on-one meeting, it's going to be a group meeting. And that's better than nothing. But I would say that at some point through this process, if that's the case, you better make sure that you are getting one-on-one guidance at some point regarding the list of schools that you're compiling. Whether that's from us or from another source, you definitely need to have that individual one-on-one guidance for your student to be able to make the right decisions when it comes to putting together a list of schools. The better guidance you get, the better list you're going to have, the better your opportunities are going to be for admission.
Yeah, and that also brings us to another point, which is, as you know, we talk about affordability, and that component is not something that you should expect your guidance counselor to speak to. They can speak to FAFSA and Pell eligibility, which is the federal program, as you know, and not where the bulk of the opportunity lies. And they'll be able to speak to independent scholarships, which, as you know, represents a very small percentage of the types of scholarships that are available for your student. So I caution to probably not use those forecasting tools and not to be discouraged by sticker price in any conversation with your guidance office. That's just not something that they have expertise in.
Okay, I think it's important that you ask what sort of support you might be able to get from the guidance office during vacation times, specifically the upcoming summer, and whether the guidance office is going to be around. The fact is the application for college admission opens over the summer. For most colleges, it opens on August 1st. There are some schools where it opens a little bit sooner, but needless to say, the summer is a good time for a lot of students to begin the process of completing applications, and sometimes kids like to get the support of the guidance office, but sometimes the guidance office is not around. They're on vacation, and they have every prerogative to take summer vacation because school's not in session. And so it's just important that you understand the extent to which the guidance office is available. I know that some schools have guidance teams, and there is always somebody available to answer questions. Maybe your specific guidance counselor might be out, but a colleague may be available. So those are just some things that you might want to understand in terms of what might be available over the summer to get some assistance and guidance.
I think it's important to point out that we are here over the summer. We do hold an application lab for our 11th grade students throughout the summer, and we will be beginning writing. Your student is likely, if they're in 11th grade, already looking post-AP exams. They'll start looking at the actual and writing a personal statement in their classes in many schools. We too will begin working on that process, and our expectation is that for students who are in 11th grade, rising 12th graders who are around through the summer, that we will have the opportunity to have a completed application before they start school next year.
That's the objective. Okay, test scores. It's a good idea you should ask your guidance counselor about your test scores, not only where you stand with your specific test scores, but the degree to which you should retest, whether you are taking the proper test. Maybe you're focused on the SAT and you should be taking the ACT or vice versa, whether or not you should be taking subject tests, a very important matter as it relates to specific programs that some students might be applying to, engineering, pre-med, for example. You may be required, some colleges may require that you take subject tests for admission in addition to the SAT, for example. So those are some things that your guidance office can help you with. They also might be able to lend some insight in terms of eligibility for national merit qualification. And so, again, subject or test scores, it's open season with the guidance office in terms of the kinds of questions that you can ask and what they might be able to assist you with.
I actually want to point out for the students that are on the call and their parents who are not in 11th grade, this is a very important area that I want to address. For students who are expecting and are eligible for an accommodation either on the SAT or the ACT now, not next year when you're about to take the tests, because there is a process each school goes through in helping you secure those accommodations for the standardized tests in 11th grade. Now is the time to inquire as to your school's process for doing so.
That is a very good point, because as she said, there is a lead time for getting approved for extended time and those sorts of things, and you don't want to wait until the last minute. And the ACT has a different process than the SAT, so you have to do them separately. So that's a good point. Okay, fine. Then we have we have a couple here. It's a good idea to request a copy of your school profile. The school profile is it's really the description of your high school that goes to the college along with your transcript to give the college a basic idea of what goes on at your high school, the number of AP courses that are offered, where kids who have graduated from the prior year, where they head to college, what the average SAT or ACT score is at the high school, the types of clubs and extracurricular programs that are offered by your high school, simply the size of the high school. So a lot of these different data points and characteristics, it's a 2-page at most profile that is sent along with the transcript. So you can get a copy of that so that you know what your high school is sending to the college when your transcript is sent along with it. So you can request a copy of your profile from the guidance office. Pretty basic, Jill. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
No, it's just that we're constantly asked is how does the college compare essentially apples to oranges, one school's coursework and rigor to another school's, and the answer is they don't. They go by the profile. You're not lining up against a student who goes to another school. You're only being evaluated on what's available to you at your school. So that's just an important thing. Everyone can relax about that.
And I think number 9 is sort of an all-encompassing one, which is really this is an opportunity to air your grievances or discuss your concerns with the guidance office, things that you might be concerned about for your particular student. Or I'm
not so sure about the airing of grievances.
Well, maybe I misspoke on that one, but certainly your concerns that you might have, not with the office itself, but maybe with where what your standing is, your ability to get into certain schools, what your focus is, what your goals are, that sort of thing. I think it's important.
If you have, and I want to point this out because I know we have a number of international students on the call. If you have a transcript coming from another country, or even another school, for those of you who have transferred throughout high school, it's very important well before you start the application process that you understand how the school that you're currently in is going to send that ultimately to college, how they're going to evaluate their grades, and how that factors in to your overall transcript going forward. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that, that's real important. Most schools do have an international counselor to help you with that, but we don't like to see students get stuck with that in the fall, and it's a complicated process to have the grades evaluated from country to country.
Great. Okay, and then I guess number 10 is the issue of GPA and rank. Does your school rank? A lot of schools don't rank, they don't rank until much later. And then as far as the GPA is concerned, a lot of colleges will recalculate the GPA. Some schools use a weighted GPA system. Some schools are on a 4.0 system. Some are on a different system, maybe a 6.0. I know my high school was on a 12-point system. So it really just depends on the school that you are at and what the GPA is and how that GPA gets recalculated. So those are some good questions that you should ask the college. Because, when you're looking at these schools and you're evaluating them and you go on public sites like College Board or some other sites and you see, the GPA, the average GPA for freshman admission, and if your school's on a 12-point scale and that school, they're evaluating them on a 4.0 scale, you want to know how to convert that. So, these kinds of things I think are important. Your guidance office should be able to assist you with that. Okay, and the last one, but not least, has to do with specialty recruiting, athletic recruiting, recruiting related to the arts. Maybe there's a specific person either on the guidance staff or somewhere else in the school who focuses on those things. In some schools, the athletic department may oversee athletic recruiting from the colleges to the high schools, but oftentimes there is a designated guidance counselor who oversees that. So it really depends on your school, but you want to find out. You want to know if your child is a potential student athlete, or if your child is, musical or is talented in theater and looks to pursue that at the next level. Maybe there are some different resources within the high school that assist specifically with the college admissions and guidance process there who can assist your student. Okay. With that, we are done with our presentation. If anybody on the call has any questions, then we would be happy to field them.
While you're doing that, I want to take a chance while people are gathering their thoughts and let everyone know that one of the things that we're rolling out with this spring is it's called YCC 360, Your College Concierge 360. It's a mobile app, and in that app it will connect, if the counselor is participating with us, the counselor, you, and your child all are connected through an app, and you can share comments and notifications and all of that good stuff mobily and on any desktop platform as well. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, and that'll be rolled out, I think, next month. So pretty excited about that, and you'll be able to communicate with us as well through that app, and nothing will fall behind. We'll have a master calendar on that for each of you, grade specific, and then your counselor can tailor it to your student.
Right. So that is something exciting coming down the pike from us, which is YCC 360, an app that will be on both iPhone platforms as well as Android.
And Chromebook friendly for those of you using them in school. Actually, somebody did have a question about registering for the NCAA. That's something your school, either your athletic office or your guidance office, can talk to you about. But yes, indeed, you do. If you're a Division I or Division II athlete or thinking that you're going to be, you do indeed need to register with the NCAA.
Mm-hmm. One thing that we did not talk about is financial aid. I think maybe you made some limited reference to it, Jill, and we have a question about whether the guidance office is equipped to handle the financial aid process. And generally they're not, but it's important that you address this with your guidance office. And what I mean is the guidance office should be asking whether there are financial limitations when it comes to selecting different colleges. So they should know if they're making recommendations that they're doing it in a way that that considers the family's finances, or is scholarship going to be required for you as a family to be able to send your child to a specific school, this kind of thing, because you don't want the guidance office to be making recommendations of colleges that you simply are not able to afford. So I think it's important that that you air that initially. You don't have to get into specifics with the guidance office and explain to them what exactly you can pay and what your income is and those sorts of things. But I do believe that a good guidance office will be proactive in asking the question whether whether finances are a consideration or a constraint as it relates to the colleges that you ultimately decide to apply to and attend.
I'm going to take an oppositional viewpoint on that, and I agree with you, Pete. This is not oppositional, that it is important to broach it, but I wouldn't let the counselor determine the price of the college, because often they don't understand the net price. And I'm not trying to slam any counselors. This is not their area of expertise, and there's so much, as you guys all know, that goes into factoring what your price for college is. That's going to be different than your neighbors, even at the same college. Much like flying on an airplane, that I caution, I don't want them to reflexively rule out schools that we know would be an opportunity for your student.
Okay. Great. Well, that pretty much covers what we wanted to share and some of the questions that we had. Let me see if there's any final questions. Nope. Okay. With that, Jill, I think that we're going to sign off, and this webinar will be posted in the membership area. So if you want to revisit it, or if you have a student who didn't get to listen to it, or if you have a spouse who didn't get to listen to it, of course, they can always log in and listen to not only this webinar, but our archive of past webinars that are posted within our Your College Concierge member community. So thank you for participating, and if you know how to reach us.
Have a great day.
Have a great night.